What's going on, everyone? This is the live stream of the night. I stopped counting on what light stream we're having, so it's just going to be live stream topics from going on here on out. But we're going to actually revisit a topic we've already talked about in a previous live stream, and the reason for that is because I got some pretty passionate folks about this one. So I'm going to kick it over and start going around the horn. But before I get to that, let me go ahead and introduce our panel tonight. So first and foremost, we got Les with Pegasus Tests. No stranger live stream. He's on every night. He's a Marine, served in the early 90s. He's a veteran of the Gulf War, has his own tactical training company called Polaris Tactics and Simulations Division. As you guys can see with that awesome polo, he has a master of logistics, Polaris Worldwide Shipping. That's your plug for the night there, brother.
Thanks, brother.
So, but be sure to check out Les's YouTube channel, Pegasus Test. All right, moving on. Got my good buddy Chad. Chad and I served together in Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines. Went down range in 2010 to Afghanistan, serving in Helmand Province. Chad is also a veteran of OIF-1, the initial invasion into Iraq, and OIF-2, hooking and jabbing in the Battle of Fallujah with 1st LAR. He's studying to get his military doctorate degree, and he always brings an excellent perspective to the group. Chad, thanks for jumping on tonight.
Glad to be here.
Les has notified me that my mic looks like it's my Bud Light bottle. So that's not a mic, that's a Bud Light bottle. So. All right. Our last panelist tonight is the good doctor. Welcome back, Dr. Christopher Larson.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
He's an accomplished author. He's written many books on small unit tactics. He's also the original founder of the One Shepherd Leadership Institute, going strong over 40 years now. And he always brings an awesome perspective to the group. Very educated. And Doc, we're glad to have you back.
Yeah, like I said, good to be back. It's been too long. I sat by the wayside jealous of some of your topics. I knew you waited till I was gone to have the coolest discussions. But not tonight. Now we got this one. I'm looking forward to this one.
Awesome. Well, all right. And I also want to mention that the good Doc has his own YouTube channel called Christopher Larson. Be sure to go check it out. All right. So let's kick this over to our usual starting pitcher of the night. Going back to Les. You got the con, brother. Kick it off.
All righty then. So it's no secret, it's all over the news. Recruiting numbers are down. The question is why? Technically, we are entering an economic recession. Those tend to be good times for military recruitment, but this time around, it's different, and it remains to be seen why. And that's what we're here to kick around tonight.
Short and sweet, huh?
Yeah, you know.
All right, I fully expect our next two panelists will be very lively. So here we go. Chad, you got
I've got a lot to say on this. First of all, I will say kudos to the Army for bringing back "Be All You Can Be." That was a cool slogan back in the 80s and 90s, so I'm glad that came back. But I digress. You know, when pondering this topic, I thought about the time that I joined the military. I was a young man. I was aggressive. I wanted to prove myself and to others that I was strong, both physically and mentally. Now, some may see that as shallow, but it provided me the motivation I needed to succeed. I'm pretty sure each of us on this panel felt the same way. You know, I scored high enough on the ASVAB and my GT scores were high enough where I could have gotten any job like counter intel, but I wanted to be a grunt. I'm going to take the liberty of speaking for everybody on this panel when I say we wanted the challenge of service. We wanted hardship. You know, I was sick and tired of living with my folks. I wanted to be out on my own, making my own way. The military was the answer. But today, and you'll tell by this next statement where my focus is going to be on, today there is a war being waged against people who think like this. It's woke commie BS, and that's the problem. What we need in military recruiting is a war on softness.
Cool. I think Chad and I are going to agree on this, but we might have some surprising differences. So what it comes down to is that, let's be honest, since 1973, when we transitioned we gave up the draft and we transitioned to the all-voluntary force, okay, VOLAR, voluntary army, but it was the all-voluntary force in 1973. Walked away from the draft. And right away, there was great concern, and it was merited, that there would be difficulty recruiting people to this. Let's go over this, just some of the numbers that have been with us that haven't really changed. There's much being made about physical, mental, moral. Physical is, are you physically fit? Do you have deficiencies, medical deficiencies? I mean, flat-footed. Do you have a stutter? Your eyesight too bad? It doesn't have to be absolutely, disabilitating, but nonetheless, the military has a standard. And it turns out that depending on where we're talking about, when we're talking, something like 70% of young men, of age men, did not, or no, age is included there. It's like 70% of men just simply weren't qualified. They're too young. They're too old. They're too out of shape. They have asthma, whatever the case is, 70% of men. Now, a whole lot is made about this, that today that sits at 77% of men are not qualified. And so we can talk about that, but I want to point out that we're really only talking a margin from 73 to now of 7%. Yes, it's slid. Yes, it indicates poor lifestyles and poor healthy choices, but it's not like we're saying 3 times the amount of men, are now disqualified. No, it's just only 7%. Okay. Mental. Are they intelligent enough? Now, you'd think this one would go higher. I think it stayed pretty much the same, but that's another, can you score high enough on the ASVAB to even enlist, okay, or become an officer? And then finally is moral. What we're really talking about here, let's cut to the chase. We're talking about, criminal records. So if you are high crime, and if anything, I suspect that's gone down. Like I'm saying, that's improved over the years. But again, probably not much here. So there you go. 3/4 of all men are eliminated on that basis there alone. Mental, moral, physical, that eliminates 75, now 78% of American males. Done. But beyond that, there are other reasons that people do not join. Let's talk about that 22, 23% that's eligible. Why aren't they joining? And I want to get this out of the way right now. The big one is that the military is dirty, difficult, dangerous. It's the same problem that people don't become garbage men or, oil well drillers and stuff like this. It's dirty, it's difficult work, and it's dangerous work. So that keeps a whole lot of them away. Also, there's lifestyle. Hey, I don't want someone telling me what to do. I like to be my own man. I don't need that kind of discipline. Thank you very much. And so that's yet another, is lifestyle. And finally, and this is where I think we're going to spend our time talking, is ideology. And there have always been ideologies shoved on all of us, and including those in the military service. But that is the one area of all that we can discuss about why aren't those 23% recruiting? Why aren't they willing to come on with an enlistment or a commission as an officer? And I think you're going to see that the ideology that we were selling, the narrative of 1973, 1993, 2013 has changed. Okay.
Okay, so my 2 cents. Hey, Stoker-Matic, if you are watching this and you want to join, man, I just sent the link to the SEER group. So if you want to jump in the fight, man, we got a spot for you. So anyways, said that piece. So here's the thing. I have several points here that I want to make, and I think some of them piggyback off what the other guys have said. But right now, I'm equating this to post-Vietnam. Recruiting was down post-Vietnam. It's down now. What did we have happen not too long ago? All right. So we pulled shocks and left Afghanistan to fend for itself. And literally it's back in the hands of the same people that harbored the terrorists that struck us on 9/11. And, essentially mission failure. And, same thing in Vietnam. Pulled shocks, left the country, defend for itself. Enemy that we fought for many years rolls on in, takes over the country. Mission failure. And I don't know. To a lot of people, military service probably, you see that. You're standing on the sidelines and seeing, guys that went down range and fought the GWAT. And, what are they? I mean, if that's not a freaking betrayal, I don't know what is. So That's how I speak. I absolutely 100% feel betrayed by that whole debacle, hands down. So that's one aspect, but by no means is that the only aspect. Another thing I want to point out: physical fitness standards. So Americans are getting fatter. So our recruiting pool is shrinking. Okay, we have a growing population of fat bodies that can't pass the basic standards to get into the service, and that's in addition. That's just out of the big pool of those that are actually qualified to get in there. So that's a problem. Okay, let's see. Education benefits. They used to be a thing, right? People would join the military to take advantage of the GI Bill and all the other educational benefits. But what do we have now? Nowadays, we have a lot of companies that incentivize you working for them, and they're essentially paying for college. So people that used to look at the military and be like, hey, I can go join the military for 4 years, get those educational benefits, and then go to college afterwards. Those folks, for a lot of them, can go work for a company now that offers very parallel benefits that the GI Bill incentivized. So that's another aspect. And then the cultural aspect, right? We have, Chad and Doc have already alluded to this, Chad more so. But, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. The U.S. military that I joined 21 years ago is not the same in many aspects. It is in a lot of aspects, but there's obvious differences now than there was back then. I'm not saying we're a less significant fighting force, but there's definitely some huge changes that have transpired, at least since my service in over 2 decades. So we have a new join who I know is also passionate about this and has some points to throw in here. So no stranger, well, kind of a stranger, but he's been on here before. Introducing him tonight, Stokermatic. Welcome to the fight, brother.
Hey, what's going on, brother?
And I know you've done a stream over this topic, man. So here you go. Here's your monologue.
Yeah, no, I hate that I missed when the conversation got started, but it's a outstanding topic and one that I've certainly thought a lot about. When I originally enlisted in 1995, BC, and it's a long time ago. My own personal why was just in service service to country, and carrying on a tradition that my family had done for generations. And then, when I enlisted, when we enlisted in the 90s anyways, nobody was really thinking about going to, of course, we wanted to go to war. We played war, as kids or whatever, but we were not a nation at war. And I separated the first time around in 2003 and came back in 2010. And in 2010, of course, we were a nation at war. And talking to some of the younger dudes that were coming in at the time, that was still even that late. Say it's that late. It's only 8-9 years, maybe more after things really started getting hot. But there was still a huge patriotic feel with a lot of the younger generation that was coming in because they were connected. They still remembered, being in school and watching stuff and just seeing war unfold. And I would dare say that the more dangerous the world is, the more dangerous the United States, the more dangerous of a place the U.S. is, the more of that patriotic feel that there is to go out and to serve. Over the course of the last 13 years, I've seen that drastically change with the dudes that have been in my charge, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, significantly. People don't talk about a sense of patriotism as far as why they were serving. They don't talk, dudes come in the 90s, a lot of those, they just wanted to get off the street. A lot of variety of reasons why people come in. I would dare say that regardless of the climate change that's up top, I don't know too many people who get bogged down in that when they're eating chow, when they're eating breakfast in the chow hall, or when they're doing their maintenance, or when they're at the rifle range. Like, nobody cares about that shit, but it's still there. And ultimately it's dudes that are our age. It's our fault. I would dare say, because it's not necessarily senior enlisted advisors who are making changes. It's our counterparts who are making changes. and it's our counterparts not only in the service but outside the service, and getting pushed around left and right. So I think it's definitely a complex issue as far as why retention numbers are low and why enlistment numbers are low. But I don't know that there's any one thing that you could say, this is it, to point the finger at. Certainly, when my dad came in the Corps, when I came in the Corps, I talked to my dad about one of my first sergeants in Okinawa who was complaining about the new Corps. And my dad was quick to tell me that when he was in 1964 to 1967, that his gunnies were talking about the new Corps. And he reminded me about the same conversation he had with my grandfather, World War II vet, greatest generation, who was being belittled about the new Corps back in the 40s. So I think it's a continuing ebb. But that being said, there is definitely something different. But again, I think that something different is not necessarily at the ground floor. My biggest concern, to be honest with everybody, is the change that's going to be in 15, 20 years. But ultimately, I can't, in my leadership positions, I can't change the big crap. The only thing that I've found solace in my position is to know that I can only do right by two things, and that's by myself and by those who are in my charge. So I take that, I've always taken that to heart, and try to push for the hardest training that I could create, because I know ultimately that those young lieutenants that have been in my charge, those young platoon sergeants, those young squad leaders, they are all going to take my place and grow up and out. And so what kind of future company commanders or battalion commanders or future sergeants majors do I want there to be? And what kind of fertilizer can I put in the ground now that may help continue to shape and mold things in the direction that I think that ultimately is rooted in the standards that ultimately have not changed, but how can we remain consistent to them so that the folks that are in their charge get the same thing? And so it just kind of rinses and repeats. But it's an uphill battle for sure, no doubt. Uphill.
Awesome. Now I got one more person to bring into the fight here, coming in late but coming in hot. We got Jared, 2 Alpha Solutions. That's his YouTube channel. Be sure to check it out. Jared is a U.S. Navy veteran, so let's get your perspective, man. Why are military recruitment numbers down?
All right. Hey, guys. Bill, good to see you there, brother. Sorry I was jumping in a little bit late. I think a lot of it has to do with the culture of today's youth. I don't want to say that they're lazy, but they're lazy. It's hard to get them out from in front of their computers a lot of times. And I think from what I was listening to right before I jumped on here, the patriotism and duty to country is just not taught anymore, at least on a limited level, and especially in the past 8 to 10 years. It has really gone downhill. Right after I got out of the military, I got out in 1999. I went in 95. September 11th happened, and you've never seen patriotism so high as then. And it started to dwindle right around 2012-13. And I think there was a big culture change right around that time. And then there's also, I think, a lot more youth mental health issues that are going on now that weren't going on 20, 25, 30 years ago. When if they weren't known. I think there's a lot more known mental health issues with youth now. And I think a lot of it is upbringing and the lack of patriotism too.
All right, fellas. Well, that is our panel tonight. So I'm going to open up the floor.
There's been a lot of good points made tonight. Chad, I agree with you. The challenge of service is a big thing. And one of the things I look at is the current ads versus the ads when I grew up. when the Marine Corps came out with its famous Metal to be Marines ad where they're forging the sword, you know, there was a guy flipping a sword around asking me if I had the metal to be a Marine. What I heard was, I'm the biggest, baddest, meanest motherfucker in the valley. You want to be like me. That's what I heard. I know that's not what the ad said. I heard, you know, and the Marine ads are still good, but you look at some of the other ads out there. One of my favorite one, the mock is the Army ad that says the Apache can fly so many miles per hour, carry so many Hellfire missiles, can do this, and I fix it while getting $60,000 for college. Dumbest ad in the history of ads. You know, or the Navy's one, a global force for good. And if you watch the ad, apparently our big enemy is giant red pins on a map. You know, back in the 80s, you know, the ads were excerpts from the Final Countdown and Top Gun. Made it the coolest thing in the world. You know, those ads came out. Everybody wanted to fly a Tomcat. Everybody wanted to be on an aircraft carrier. Do you see a Navy ad that even features an aircraft carrier lately? I mean, no, they're not advertising for what they want, so they're not getting it. You know, Air Force, aim high. You know, that was a great ad in the 80s, even though if you aim high, you know, you always miss. You know, the last Air Force I had a plane turning into a transformer. I mean, they're not advertising for what they want, so shock of all shocks, they're not getting it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I was thrilled to hear that they're bringing back Be All You Can Be, because that's the one that hooked me.
Army, because that's all you can be.
They're not bringing it back in the same vein, I'll say that. But, you know, hopefully it will do some good over the long run. I'll say this, though. I tend to agree with the other panelists up until very, very recently that my concern was, and Brent and I have spent several evenings over beer talking about this. And my concern was that those spineless youth. And I'll tell you what, I've got a renewed perspective on this, and I say, guys, we're headed the wrong direction. They're not spineless at all, and they're not. They don't lack dedication, and they very much want that adventure. They want to serve their nation. I don't think that's where the problem rests at all. So if we can just for a minute, let's talk about what the problem is. And the problem is that for the last 2 years, the only way Marines said, hey, we made quota. We made quota last year, 2022. No, they didn't. Did you know how they made quota? They literally counted the guys on delayed entry that are coming in this year. That are still civilians. That's the only way they could squeak and barely make quota. All right. Several other branches attempted this and still failed. The Army did not attempt this because it was 15,000 people below quota. The Army has to recruit 60,000 a year. It's 15,000 for the second year in a row. It's nowhere near. And by the way, the reality is that the other branches aren't doing that much better than the Army. They really aren't. They're able to, because they have smaller quota numbers, they're able to go and mix and match numbers. But the fact is, for the last 2 years, really no one has been making recruiting. And let me point out that the Army Reserve, let's just take that one as an example, hasn't made quota in 5 years. No, I take that back. I'm sorry, 7 years. Okay, guys? 7 years. It hasn't made quota. But we're only seeing part of the picture. That's part of it. It's like, hey, why can't we get people to serve? The rest of it, and I can give you quote after quote, but I'll just tell you right now, if you listen to the news over the last month or two, you will see Secretary of the Army, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, all of them, all right down the street from me at the Pentagon, on Capitol Hill. And they stand in there and they say, hey, we're not having a problem. We don't have a wokeness problem. We don't have an ideology problem. We just don't have this problem. And let me prove it to you by admitting, though we didn't make recruitment, we all made our retention goals. Remember, there's 2 types of getting soldiers, right? And warriors. One is to recruit them off the street, and the next one is to keep them from leaving. So we retain our NCOs and officers, right? Wrong. Do you know how we made our retention? It's very simple. We have the second lowest retention rate in all of NATO. Let me say that again. The mighty United States Armed Forces has the second lowest retention rate in all of NATO. You remember the guys we beat up all the time because they don't do what they need to do to defend their own damn country? Hear me out. Hear me out. Belgium's retention rate, 90%. Yeah. Canada, 78.9%. Denmark, 75%. France, 80%. Germany, 70%. Guys, this just keeps going. It's Italy, 85%. Norway, 77%. Where is America's retention goals? Where's our retention goals? And if you said 55%, you're right. We put the bar so friggin' low. How can we not make it? So that's our problem, is we don't have big enough military. When I say we don't have enough big enough military, the United States Armed Forces is supposed to be, I think it's 485,000. And we were so low last year, they said, let's go 466. They're expecting something like 450 at the end of this year. And the reality is we could be down to 425. Now you go, holy crap, 425, that's horrible. 425,000 active Army. Wait, you're missing the bigger picture. 3 years ago, our Secretary of the Army said we need 525. So 485 is not enough. Yet we're getting ready to drop down to 425. This is becoming a country club. We can't recruit them. We can't keep them. That's our problem.
Doc, I'm going to have to disagree with something you said. For me, the biggest problem is the war on masculinity. I do think there is some level of spinelessness that does exist. Let me explain. I've read various articles about obesity, criminal records. Yes, they're all a problem. But we live in a country of 330 million people. Statistically, there are plenty of people out there who are well qualified. I read an article from NBC about this topic. And the article quoted a recent DoD survey of young people who were eligible for service. And the results were shocking. I quote, more than half of the young Americans who answered the survey, about 57%, think they would have emotional or physical or psychological problems after serving in the military. Nearly half think that they would have physical problems. They think they're going to be physically or emotionally broken after serving, said one senior U.S. military official familiar with the recruiting issues, who believes the lack of familiarity with military service contributes to that perception. I didn't think about the physical or emotional injury when I joined. I didn't give a fuck. Service was whatever pains and mental and physical I've gone through, it was worth it. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, previous generations really didn't think about injury. Service was just something they did. This survey is a product of today's weak and coddled generation. Now, I'm not going to deny things like obesity aren't a problem, criminal history is a problem. But if I were to make a list of reasons for low military recruitment, pussiness would be at the top.
I think we are saying the same thing, but I'm going to put a finer tip on that pencil, if you don't mind. And I'm going to ask you, Chad, and anyone else, who do you think, what ideological, I guess, umbrella or, adherence do you think the soy boys believe in? Do you think the soy boys are devout Christians, Jews, Muslims? Do you think they're raised in two-parent families? Do you think they come from a conservative Republican perspective? That's my question to you, Chad. I absolutely agree with what you're saying, but I'm asking you, how would you describe the soy boys in America?
I think I just did.
Yeah. Okay. Here's where I'm trying to bring this. And this is the surprise I found over the last week of doing this research, was something I did not expect. And if I forget to quote where my sources are, hold me to that. I've certainly brought them with me. But here's the big picture. The big picture is that, first off, defining wokeness can be found in the military's diversity, engagement and inclusion, DEI. Okay, we're saying wokeness. I often call it Marxism, but the reality is diversity, engagement, and inclusion. It is the effort to make the military a social justice program, and we can talk about that because there's a long history of that. But when they as the military continues to sin, and I'm talking its top brass, continues to say, we don't have a wokeness problem. We don't have a DEI problem. We don't have that. We have our DEI training, and it's wonderful. And DEI, diversity, makes us stronger. Here's what we found out. And there is one, everybody says, yeah, there's no data. You can't prove that DEI and wokeness is hurting us. Wrong. There's actually been one company that's one research group that's been watching since 2015, and they've got data for every single year, broken down by age group, broken down by gender group, broken down by ethnicity, right? Racial ethnicity backgrounds. They've got it all broken down. And here's what they found, Chad. Woke DEI training is not keeping the conservative kids out of the military at all. Not at all. In fact, there is a ever so slight uptick, very, very tiny, mind you, but there's been an uptick over the last 7 years of conservative kids from two-parent families and Christian or religious faiths coming into the military. Guess who, Chad, has just fallen off the planet? It's been liberals, Democrats, kids from single parent families. The military used to get a pretty sizable chunk of their recruiting from, because even though only 26% of them claimed in 2015, yes, I'm patriotic and I have considered military service. Today, that number's down around 4 to 5%, from 25 to 26%. So DEI is keeping out potential recruits, but it's not keeping out your Christian conservatives. Dude, it's keeping out your soy boys. It's keeping out your feminists. That's who it's against. And it is impacting numbers. I'm not saying so what. It really is. I just said the military by the end of this year could potentially be down 100,000 troops. Think how big that is. Think how big the Marines are. And that's just their active duty. It's 100,000 troops. Why? Because Democrats aren't ponying up. The liberals aren't putting in skin. Guys?
Yeah, if I could just compound on that, Doc, and this kind of piggybacks off what Stoker said. Like when I go and speak to my Marines across the battalion and stuff, I talk about bayonets and freaking communist chess. And the Devil Dogs are very receptive of that kind of language. I mean, they are absolutely war fighters. And to piggyback on what Stoker was talking about, I am of the belief, I am not this guy that says, hey, the latest generation is weak, this, that, and the other, because I know, just like Stoker already mentioned, that they are always going to be the greatest generation of the current generation, right? The Lance Corporal that hit the beach on Iwo Jima was the new core of his era, right? And, when you look at Eugene's book, when he's talking about with the old breed, my understanding is the old breed was referring back to the guys that were in the Marine Corps before World War II started. Right. But we think of the old breed as, hey, the World War II generation. But these guys were referring to the old breed as the old timers, right? That were the campaign covers, hooking and jabbing in the Philippines and, World War I and whatnot. So, I absolutely think that you're right. And I think we've had, you mentioned we had these conversations before. I think we are getting patriotic young Americans to join. Hell, we even have a student in One Shepherd that's shipping off to boot camp very soon. Very patriotic, very, we'll leave it at that. Very hard charging, warfighter, and he's excited to go join. And so the right people are getting going there. But, not everybody is an 0311 fucking infantry rifleman, right? And we need, wrench turners. We need fucking water purification specialist, okay? And some of those guys that might be joining the U.S. military for other reasons other than, patriotism and sticking 6 inches of cold hard steel in the freaking communist chest. Those guys might be deterred because of XYZ reasons. So.
Well, okay, so let me follow up on that, Brent. And I'm sorry, I'll shut up, I promise. But, no, I won't. I promise. Anyway, no, come on. So what you just said is very valuable because, and Chad, I'll draw you to this. So if we had, let's say, if you have people that aren't, that extreme patriotism and don't want to, shove a bayonet in someone's neck, but they would still say, look, man, I still have to do my service. I feel a calling. I feel a duty. and you say, okay, well, this guy's, he's just not cut from the same cloth, right? And I don't know what else to call him, the patriotic, but he's patriotic enough. And so he's going to go and he's going to be a wrench turner. Thank God, because we all know we need far more wrench turners and bean counters and all this other stuff. Your tooth to tail, we need far few teeth than we need the rest of that body. And so thank God. And we could recruit from very interesting and valuable sources. And I guess what I'm saying is the best way I can describe them, certainly the way they were described in the article that I'm referring to, is they were described as liberal Democrats, okay, from families of liberal Democrats. But again, those people are opting out. And here's the thing about this. The reason the brass is embracing DEI wokeness, the reason is they've been told this is the same as other social experiments that the military was leading on. Let's get right to the heart. Integration. Blacks integrated into units, at the beginning of Korea, right? The Korean War. Women integrated in the military. Gays integrated in the military. We can keep going all the way back. And yes, I do believe they'll reinstate the draft long before that if this continues to get worse. But my point is this, that equality of opportunity meant that these people could pull themselves up by their bootstraps. When you said, hey, you're a disadvantaged part or segment of our society, you can get the GI Bill, you can make something of yourself, earn rank, and have a steady career. You can do this in the military. And that's wonderful because it's all about equality of opportunity. But this is not what DEI wokeness is about. DEI wokeness is very, very clearly about intersectional identity, about playing victimhood, and mostly it's about equity. And equity does not mean equality opportunity, quite the opposite. Equity is leveling at the end of the race. It's about oppressing the best, strongest warriors and making sure that we're elevating and promoting the weakest. What's this mean, guys? What's that mean? It means the military is seeing the fall of meritocracy. It's not just that we recruited the best. It's that the best are the people who got promoted. Honestly, it was because they demonstrated their ability as warriors, as leaders, right? Well, DEI says no. No. Be less white. Be less ambitious. If you're right, stop caring about being that Western linear thinking of being right. Step aside for the minority lesbian woman in uniform and let her take command, even though you earned it and you're right. You need to stop being so ambitious. Stop being so arrogant. Stop applying yourself. Stop being white. That's from Coca-Cola all the way to the U.S. Navy, even in the United States Marine Corps. It's hitting all of us. And this is what DEI is about. And I'll stop talking there to say DEI is, the problem with DEI is that it's not equality of opportunity. It's equity. And it's the end of meritocracy.
I'm going to tackle that super chat about conscription. It's probably coming out of necessity, but it's going to be interesting. I once talked to a man who was on a draft board during the Vietnam era. And even then, with all the protests, all the people going to Canada, his main job was to weed people out. They always had more people than they needed. And he tells the story how, because most people don't realize the draft never stopped after World War II. Kept going all through the 1950s and everything. And, he had a guy come in the early 60s and his number just didn't come up, but he reported like he was supposed to. And this guy came back a few years later because he was told to report. And they said, no, we're not taking you. You got married. A few years later, gets contacted again, shows up at the draft board, and he tells them, no, I have a child now. They're okay. We're not taking you. They were using, even as late as 1967, being married and having a child was a reason for them not to take you. And that's the main purpose of a draft board. So if you institute a draft to get 100,000 people, your selection level is going to be so high. And for every guy that's going to show up and go, okay, I'll do what I'm supposed to do. I make it fine, try my best, all that. You're probably going to have 5 guys that are going to say, fuck you, no, and not do it. And now the government's in the job of putting those 5 guys in prison, which the current government would not do. So there'll be no trouble for missing your draft. So practically nobody will show up and it will fail.
Well, even then, there's precedent that draft dodgers are pardoned following the conflict. So,
Thought a couple things as you all were sharing some stuff. The first one, a little unrelated, but it's in there somewhere. Of course, one of the most famous Marines of all time, Smedley Butler, wrote and toured quite extensively after his service. Pamphlet called War is a Racket, and it's a great read that is applicable. It's timeless. And so there's definitely a lot there. But the other thing I was thinking that you almost have to look at from a little bit of a wider field of view. You know, if you roll back, whoever made the policy that pulled me out of a Quonset hut and put me into a 4-man room. So instead of living with my squad, I had to live with my fire team. That was a major change, and it was a MWR type change, if you will, right? And then eventually those 4-man rooms went to 2-man rooms, and now those 2-man rooms are 1-man rooms. And from my foxhole, I think that is one of the biggest erosions to the cohesion in the military is this isolating event. But nobody wants to take people out of 1-man rooms because we've become accustomed to it. And so the only thing that happens from there is you have continued changes. Just like I'm sure when we look back at our earlier days, if you look at the demographics, certainly my units in the 90s, I would dare say that 80% of the population was single. The only people who were married were staff NCOs. Generally speaking, you may have a couple of junior NCOs who were married and had some kids, but the vast majority of all E4, all corporals and below, were damn near all single. That is not the case anymore. I don't know that this is causation or correlation, but there's an interesting shift in the dynamic where I have very few people in the barracks. It seems like almost damn near everybody's freaking married and coming in married, which is great. But it's very interesting to see that change in the dynamic of why some of these folks are coming in who are married and weren't married before. And it's also a big reason for why folks stay in. But it's very interesting to see the correlation between the types of demographics that we have seen in the military for sure.
Well, on that subject of marriage, you know, when I was serving in the 80s and 90s, you know, marriage was your ticket out of the barracks.
Right.
Barracks life sucked. Most of the Marines in my unit that got married probably married one of the WMs, and it was more of a contract than anything. Because wow, you get to go out, your pay went up because you got subsidized. You know, you didn't get stuck with weekend duty, and there was just advantages to being married. I mean, you know, you were literally penalized for only meeting Miss Right now versus Miss Right.
I don't know what you mean that barracks life sucked. I mean, we're going down a rabbit hole here, but I was partying all the time. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'll tell you what I'm talking about, and I'm kind of putting guys like Brent on the spot here. For the love of God, will someone explain to me how you're improving my health and comfort on a health and comfort inspection, busting into my room at 3:30 in the goddamn morning, knocking the ceiling tiles out of my sink, upending my rack, trashing my wall locker that I'm told to leave open so it won't fucking make mold, and then pouring bleach on my dress blues? Will someone, for the love of God, explain that to me? And then when I complain about bleach being poured on my dress blues, have my commanding officer tell me I'm a pussy. Someone explain that one to me.
It improves my morale.
Yeah. I was going to say, you stop. You're motivating the shit out of me.
Get pissed. I'm the smart one. I know 2 other guys in that barracks went UA, and one gunny got his ass fucking kicked.
Listen, and I know Stoker can vouch for this. There are disgusting human beings amongst our ranks.
That there are reasons we have field day.
Level. Stoker can tell you a story about shitty skivvies. I can tell you a story about freaking piss bottles in a wall locker, huddled in a corner when there's a head in the freaking squad bay he's in. So there are some individuals that absolutely need to be addressed in more drastic circumstances.
That went quiet, like uncomfortably quiet. Like, were we calling Les a nasty body? Maybe. Maybe you were. I'm not saying you were. On the other hand, I recognize there's two truths to this. And one is that there is hazing and, past a certain kind of point, and maybe entirely, hazing just really never did much for anyone. I never got it. I got hazed. I just never understood it. I'm like, I want to be here, dumbasses. Stop, leave me alone. But, like I said, there's an argument to be made. Hazing. There is a gut check every time you walk into a new unit. They want to know, do you have the medal? And so that I can appreciate. But some of the hazing goes right to the point of criminal behavior. We could do without that. That's demoralizing, and it's not really conducive for a professional military. And the flip side of the argument is what Brent said, and that is that you do I have people that they would throw up on themselves, they would piss on themselves, and I would have to show them how to use a washer and drying machines. Like, they didn't know how to do their own damn laundry, let alone keep a checkbook or anything. I wound up as a squad leader. I wound up taking care of my boys all the time, and they were a mess. Many of them were, and so there's some extreme cases that to a civilian, they'll think, what the hell? But hey, you had to be there, man. It did set it set us on the correct path by coming down hard sometimes. And so I think both of that's true. Like you said, I'm not sure that's really the recruiting or retention issue. Although retention issue deserves probably its own.
Retention is simple, and one of the things I saw during the Clinton era where the numbers sucked and retention took a dip then was lack of doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Boom.
In the Guard, one of the things they were, oh wow, we're not retraining people. Oh, so we'll just stay in the armory. Oh, we won't do this, we won't do that. It's like everybody joined an infantry unit to go do infantry things, and they had us do anything but. And that's why people left. I came to fucking shoot and blow shit up, and they didn't shoot and blow shit up, so they left. It wasn't worth the effort.
Well, maybe that is relevant, Les. Maybe that's relevant right now. Look, since 2015, combat arms were open to women. Since 2015, we've had, single room, soldiers in single rooms because women are there, because we embraced all sorts of lifestyles that we probably shouldn't have because we didn't have a meaningful discussion. And this isn't to disparage people who are going through acute depression and are trans. This isn't to disparage, lesbian, gays, bis. So what? That's just their preference. I don't give a damn. And I think most of us don't. But what I am saying is that when you lower the standard so greatly that you can no longer do meaningful training less, I swear to God, dudes, guys, I was on a social media platform. I'm trying to think which one it was. It's about a month and a half, 2 months ago. And this guy was going on about, hey, back in the day, I remember working with, whatever, 5th group or something like this. And we got to talking. There was a bunch of us in this saying, yeah, back in the 80s, I was with this unit. 90s, I was with this unit. Early 2000s, I was with this unit. And we did this, that, and the other thing. I'm not joking. So we're talking. There must be like 6 or 8 of us. This guy comes in, and from his handle, it seems like he was a male. Anyway, he says, you guys are full of shit. I'm paraphrasing, but this is what he says. You guys are full of shit. We're infantry, not special forces. I'm currently serving an active duty, and we don't do any of the things you're talking about. What do you mean a 35-mile road march? What do you mean walking until, you hallucinate? What do you mean working alongside Rangers and Special Forces for months at a time? None of that is true. None of that is true. And I'm going, oh my God. And this guy's active duty Army infantry. And so you want to say what their retention is. Can you imagine going active duty 4 years and just not getting to climb the mountains, have the adventures, face the danger that you came to face. But everything is, the RAND study came out, guys, 1 year ago, about 13 months ago. The RAND study was given a year-long assignment by the Pentagon, of all people, to say, hey, what's going wrong with our PT test here in the Army? And they came out and said, here's the thing. Embrace your DEI. Be proud of the fact that you are a military that has women and all these other, diverse groups in your combat arms, and don't care about the 60%. This is theirs, 60% decrease in physical standards. Just give that monkey up and say, yeah, but what's important is we let women here, right? And that's what they said. Or your choice is that, or face the facts that you have multiple standards inside of the United States Army. And you're just going to have to deal with that. The fact that this soldier doesn't do as much work as this soldier. This soldier far outperforms that soldier. But hey, DEI, equity is they'll be promoted, both be promoted to sergeant. They'll both be promoted to all, and they'll both get awards and ribbons and all of those wonderful things. You got to give them both, because this soldier meets a much, much lower threshold of standard. And so the military hasn't done this. The Army hasn't done this, by the way, or they're trying to transition. But here's the point, Les. What's that telling the go-getters? What's that telling them, those guys who will fix bayonets? It's saying, whoa, slow your roll there, dude. Sergeant, take that bayonet off that rifle. Take that camouflage off your face. We're not going to do anything hardcore. We're going to sit on our asses. Well, you can't blame that on the soldiers. You can't blame that on the Marines. That's an institutional problem that has been identified and no one wants to touch.
I mean, I don't disagree with you, but I would dare say that there is very little in actual regulation and in field manuals and in TCs that has changed. Like if you're to read Army regulation for leadership today, it's going to read almost verbatim what it was 20 years ago. And the power of the non-commissioned officer hasn't changed. I would dare say that there's a bit much larger problem with the NCO Corps. And we know that is the backbone of our military. It's NCOs having the power and then enforcing it, but they have to be right. And so too many times, we were wrong in the way that we treated young troopers coming in and hazing and things of this nature to a certain degree. But anymore that there's so little that I see, and so I counsel and I correct this almost every day. I don't even rip on junior enlisted. I rip on NCOs every freaking day, counseling them and telling them how they need to be going about doing their job, because there's nothing preventing that sergeant from doing drill and ceremony after PT. There's nothing saying and holding that sergeant back from going to the barracks, whether it's to do a room inspection or to take them to chow in the DFAC and eat and break bread together, or to take them and do some, in the Army, we do sergeant's time training on Thursday, and it's guaranteed time that nobody's going to fuck with as long as you have your shit straight and you're doing what you said you're going to do. Go out to the field, eat some MREs, go do some cool shit. But too many times, junior NCOs don't want to do that. They don't want to be the bad guy. They don't want to put boot to ass. And so I put boot to their ass, and then they, it flows downhill. But it is definitely a complex problem for sure.
I want to touch on retention, because I know for a fact that the Marine Corps has kind of tried to change its model, right? Because it used to have an old model of recruit and replace, right? We had X amount of Marines getting out of the Marine Corps, and we're going to recruit X to replace that amount. And they're trying to focus and reorient their model towards retention, right? Fill in those stop gaps with retaining Marines. And in addition to that, they've looked at the possibility of getting laterals, right? Going to some devil dogs that maybe got out of the Marine Corps years ago, but now they're these IT studs, and bringing them back in at an equivalent pay grade to do cyber shit, fuck up the Chinese cyber war, technology and stuff like that. So the Marine Corps is actively looking at transition stuff. They're not just sitting there marking time and saying, oh, we're hoping our numbers are going to get better. They're actually looking at it and saying, hey, how can we change this? And maybe one of the ways we can fix this deficit is by changing our current model and orient it on retaining Marines and or bringing in, guys that have gotten out and doing lateral moves, bringing America's best and brightest in a different capacity. Now, I'm not sitting here, advocating for, bringing on a civilian doing an IT job that, as a gunnery sergeant. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not saying that that's exactly what's going to happen. But the Marine Corps, I will tip my hat to the Marine Corps, at least looking at this in a different lens and trying to, tackle this problem in a different manner.
No, my 2 cents is that they're going to, I think this is the right path. I think that they're going to have to think about, okay, I'm still going to go to public schools. I'm still going to recruit those because there's still enough, hard charging, patriotic men and women that we need to recruit to the armed forces. Great. But they've been looking and barking up the tree on campuses and all this stuff, which is just far too woke. And they're taught to hate America. You're not going to defend something you hate. You're not going to go out and risk your life for something you hate. So maybe they need to start thinking in terms of recruiting. I'll get back to retention. They need to start thinking, all right, I better go to trade schools. I better find another place where they don't have to put up with DEI wokeness and they're not taught to hate America. And all the things that we represent, that, that they still believe we're exceptional and worth defending. That said, I think retention is going to play a larger and larger. We're seeing that anyway. We're seeing that the Pentagon wants to focus on retention. They're going, oh, but look, we're making our retention numbers. Well, yeah, your threshold is really friggin' low, but I still think you're right, Brent. I think we need to go back to those people that, not just the ones that are in what Les was saying. We need to make sure that they're having that adventure, that they're having exactly what they expected to have, or at least close enough that they're willing to stay, and then reach back out to those veterans and say, hey guys, you've had a couple years out, you've done some stuff, you've picked up some new trades and skills. Why don't you consider coming back in? And if you can, if you can convince them that there is an adventure and that their duty is still valued, then maybe you can talk them in. And, particularly those that are married and everything else. I think that's a good approach is what I'm saying. Chad, you want to jump in on that? You look like you were leaning forward.
I'm perusing the comments here.
Oh, are you?
I know Stoker's got to pop smoke here in a minute. So, Stoker, you want to say your piece before you pop smoke? And I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the invite. I will say that part of the retention problem, in at least in my service, has been my fault. You see, there's more. These are all the dudes. Those are all the dudes, and I keep them in my skull.
I know what that is.
I think ultimately, I can't speak on, bringing new dudes in. But I do think that in order to keep the best, we have to be the best. And that begins and ends with the core of the non-commissioned officer. And you have to be able to have that ramrod down your spine and don't bend left to right just because the wind is blowing one way or another. Because I'll tell you that from my experience, you could be in the crappiest location and have the crappiest pay and live in the crappiest house or barracks or whatever it is. But if the dudes that you work with and the guys that you work for are fucking amazing, then you're going to have the greatest cohesion that there is. And those dudes are going to stay in to continue their service. But when you're a piece of shit leader who's running around doing all the crappiest things in the world, then that's going to impact, those retention rates. So definitely poor leadership has an impact there. And there's a lot of dynamic challenges between, especially on Brent, like you're talking about the technical side of the house, and how do we balance these types of things. And I would just dare say that I would be really slow to push for big changes because I don't think that works out well. I think we just have to find a way to be smart and to make our team, even if it's slimmed down even more, even better. And there's certainly a lot of complex issues there that go far beyond the uniform service, because now we're starting to talk about Congress and money and the racket that's out there. So all we can do is just fucking keep it on grinding. So I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you jumping on, man.
All right.
See ya.
Jared, you've been quiet.
Yeah, I had some comm issues there. My phone got hot and shut down on me. So sorry about that.
What you got, man? What do you got to throw into the fight here?
Well, let's go back to the Army's, I guess, recent ad campaign with Emma and her two mommies. Mm-hmm. That in itself would deter me from joining the Army in a heartbeat. It just, and I think they're getting away from that here now. I don't think that worked out too well for them, and I think they realized that.
And let me just piggyback on that. Like, the fact that you're seeing like this latest Be All You Can Be commercial is a complete 180 from that, right? So
Very much so.
That should show you guys that the Army got the message that, hey, that because it wasn't just Emma and Tumami, it was a whole series. If you guys haven't seen that, go watch it. It was a whole series like that, and the reception of those commercials was just to the point to where they like had to turn off the comments. And YouTube, I can't confirm this, but YouTube might have got rid of the dislike button probably because of those commercials. But in any event, you can see that the Army has completely reoriented their sights, right? They were hitting very low into the left into the berm, and they adjusted their sights. And you watch their commercials now, and they're starting to look like Marine Corps commercials, to be quite frank, because Marine Corps commercials are always about slaying the enemy. If it's not a fucking knight in shining armor on a horse slaying a king, it's fighting a fucking dragon or hitting the beach or blowing freaking Chinese drones out of the sky is the latest one.
Or commie bodies floating down the river.
Yes, that is exactly it. I'm glad we're talking about this because I've got a little rant here on that. So this is good because I do want to talk about recruiting in a minute. We're talking about retention, but how do you recruit the best? We're talking about retaining the best. How do you recruit the best? And it's interesting. I saw a quick side note here. I saw a segment on Al Jazeera News today on this topic, and I know I can hear the eyes rolling right now. They had 3 far left woke guests who claimed that things like racism, homophobia, and climate change were causes of low recruitment. Did you guys know that? Yes, climate change is a cause. I bullshit you not. Yeah. These are not only fucking morons, but people who live in fantasy land. So it's not any of those things. It's the woke war on masculinity. I'm going back to that. Is the cause of all this. It is woke messages in military commercials. So when it comes to recruiting, we need to go back to that fundamental question. What is the primary function of the military? The answer is politically incorrect and super simple. To quote George Patton, it's to make the other poor, dumb son of a bitch die for his country. Okay. And I think we need ads that focus on that. Okay. And there's probably going to be some disagreement here with what I'm about to say, but that's fine. Let me tell you what I think every military commercial should be. And everybody's kind of said it, but not exactly come out and said it. For the Army Marines, it should be troops storming beaches, jumping out of planes, bayoneting tire dummies, artillery guns and tanks going boom, and individual soldiers crawling through the mud. For the Air Force and the Space Force, we need to see planes dropping bombs, blowing shit up, drones and missiles flying everywhere, nuclear fucking explosions, maybe some commercials thrown in there focused on computer hacking because we do need that. For Navy, Coast Guard, big guns going boom, PT boats, machine gun and beaches, and Navy SEALs kicking indoors. We need to attract a certain type of person, an aggressive type A badass. And that isn't just for combat MOS. Okay, we need the same type of motivated people in logistics, admin, intel. The point is, we don't need soft soldiers, sailors, airmen, coasties, guardians, or Marines. Rant over.
Anybody disagree with that?
Well said,
No.
Chad. Well said.
I've already re-enlisted, so I need to get some more paperwork or something.
No, I think you're again, Matt, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. Look, Emma failed, and I was surprised how much I found when I was doing my research on recruiting. Frankly, most of it went to DEI wokeness, but it wasn't all there. And there were some really, other studies and other commentators coming out and saying, look, you have your traditional objections to joining the military, right? But I was surprised how many people commented on the Emma series of the United States Army as look, this is where things went wrong. And one of the things that they were pointing out, I read several different articles, was and that literally broke them down about what they were trying to achieve and how they missed the mark. But overall, Emma was trying to reach out to liberal Democrats, Marxists, seriously, it was trying to reach out to the Marxists and say, hey, look, we value you and you're the hero of this story. But this is, again, why it failed so colossally, is because apparently while there was a cringe factor, those 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 17-year-old boys that they asked, strapping young men that had the mental, moral, and physical ability to come in, and they asked them, do you care about this? And they're like, no, it's just weird. But it didn't stop them from recruiting, right? They came in anyway. But when they went and they asked the target audience, the liberal Marxist and all of this, it didn't sell them. They said, no, I'm not defending something. The reason you're showing me this is because America's a bad place, because we're not exceptional, because we're oppressive, and now they saw right through it. You're trying to convince me to come defend this system, and I hate it. I despise it. So Emma failed on all levels. I mean, it just did. It failed completely. So I'm glad that they're getting rid of it and going back to, as you said, Chad. I mean, if you're joining the military, you can join for 100 reasons. And I would argue probably, as long as it's mental, moral, physical, all that stuff, probably none of them are wrong. If you're coming in for college money, that's not wrong. I had a drill sergeant when we came in that said that way back in 1985. And he said, there's no wrong reason, but your primary reason better be the defense of this nation. Because when things get hard, and they're going to get hard, and they're going to get dangerous and dirty, you're going to ask yourself, what the hell am I doing here? But if you keep in mind, I'm here defending my nation, then you know why you're there. And this is the problem with DEI wokeness, is they're saying, don't defend this. But yeah, we need to, that needs to be your primary purpose. And we can't sugarcoat that, we're no longer the Department of War, we're the Department of Defense, right? And so we've had this long tradition of watering down exactly what we do, which is, of course, stab people in the throat with bayonets after we've set them on fire. That's what we do. We're predators.
I would also add one of the things where the Army went wrong, if you remember right in the dip in the Clinton years when it was recruiting was way down there too, is the Army's big thing back then was the Army College Fund. That was its big recruiting tool. And I remember an article published, I think it was in Infantry Magazine, it might have been Cavalry, one of the two, but it was by an artilleryman. And he was saying how the younger generation sucked because all they did was come in, do their 4 years, take their money and run and make no commitment to the nation. And, one of the things that pissed me off about that was I remember at the time that if you did the Army College Fund, the clock started ticking on when you could use the money the moment you joined. So if you re-enlisted, you basically gave up your money. So why wouldn't somebody who signed up to get money for college go to college after they got it? Because they were just going to give it away if they didn't. And, that's just part of the bargain. Let's see, the soldier who came in and took the Army College Fund did his part. He gave you the time. Now you give him the money. And I don't see where he was part of the problem, but that artilleryman at the time definitely thought he was.
Do you know how many, Les, do you know how many soldiers take advantage of their GI Bill and college funds?
Probably surprisingly few.
It's single digit.
That being said, though, like when I went in '87, the Montgomery GI Bill, when I got out, the clock started ticking.
Mhm.
I didn't go my full term through college, but if I suddenly decided to go back now, I don't have any benefits anymore.
That's right.
Yeah, I used my GI Bill to go to horseshoeing school. You know, it was 5 years after I got out.
Yeah.
You know, it's a trade school. It's not college. It's a trade school.
Hey, that works.
But, yeah, it paid for my whole school.
Yeah,
It wasn't an overly expensive school. It was like 10 grand or something, and I think I had 12 grand to use.
Man, the GI Bill, even the old one, the Montgomery, before it transitioned to the post 9/11, that bought me so many guns because I was working full time while I was going to school, and the GI Bill was just extra money for guns. But anyways, I digress. I want to go back to Emma and her two mommies, and why that was a failed commercial. And I know what they were trying to do, right? And I think Doc, you were hitting on this, right? They're trying to target a certain segment, saying, "Hey, we need more," right? Whether that's females, whether that's
They were saying we don't care who or what you are. We want you, is what they were saying.
But they were targeting like females, right? So like I know the Marine Corps at one point, I remember reading this or being told this, was hurting on female Marines. We weren't getting the numbers that they wanted, right? And wrong looks like the Emma commercial, right? Because what was that doing? That completely alienated. If you watch that commercial, it's not hey, completely anti-gay. Like most people do not care what your sexual orientation is. But if you watch that commercial, it goes into, my two mommies have been protesting against hate and, all this other stuff. So it's completely alienating all your typical Christian males that maybe don't believe in homosexuality, right? And that is a significant portion of the U.S. military. Maybe they don't personally believe in homosexuality. They're straight, males. But it's not that they discriminate against those individuals, right? They don't care what that individual person does with their lifestyle, but you're essentially, putting it in those people's face who make up the vast majority of the U.S. military that, we're on board with this ideology, but we're not on board with what you believe. Okay, so that's where the Emma commercial failed, in my opinion. I will give you an example where the Marine Corps got it right. Same scenario. They're trying to bring in more female Marines, right? Awesome commercial. And you guys may or may not have seen this. I loved it. It starts off with a young man going into recruit training, and it goes through essentially his career. And he's an 0311. He's freaking hooking and jabbing, hitting the beach, jumping off of Amtraks. All right. And then it transitions at some point to he's an older man. He's got gray in his hair. And it started with a parade. He's a young man. He's watching a parade go by of Marines in dress blues. Okay. Then it transitions after it goes through his career, in a flash. He's an older man. He's got his family, gray hair. He's, barbecuing. He's watching this parade. And here is this young female Marine coming by in her dress blues. And it's showing the transition. Right. I mean, it was an awesome recruiting commercial. And I absolutely, it literally got a little water in my eye, man. It was so well done. That is the way that you target a specific audience if that's what you're trying to do. If you guys haven't seen that commercial, I highly recommend you go and watch it.
I think the Emma commercial was very patronizing to one target audience, and I don't think they appreciated it that much.
Yeah, agreed. And guys, this isn't I think I've said this on the show more than once, but you can see this across the board. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I haven't said. So I'm Roman Catholic, okay? And the Roman Catholics, like most of our Christian brothers and sisters, but particularly in the Roman Catholic Church, there has been a massive exodus, okay? And it's problematic. So when you look at this and you say, they're, because I think since Vatican II, since the 1960s, the Catholics have asked themselves, they need to be asking other questions, but they've asked themselves, how can we be appealing to larger audience? How can we expand? Because they were just ginormous, in terms of percentage of the world's population. And they were asking, how do we grow even bigger? Why, I know, look at the populism of Protestantism. We'll start singing songs and the mass will look more and more like Protestant Christian faiths. And they thought that this would work. And it's been nothing but a downward trend. Yet there are a few enclaves who aren't even embraced by the Catholic, by the Vatican and stuff like this. They're allowed, they're tolerated, but they're kind of looked down their nose. And these are the traditional Catholics who still say Mass in Latin, right? And they hold themselves to a higher standard. And guess what? You can't find a seat. You cannot find a seat in Latin Masses, guys. Now you say, well, that's because they're rare and there's not as many of them offered. So of course they're going to be popular and they go. Well, hold on. You can't find a seat. And the average age, I'm told, is 24 years old. Whereas you go to Mass on any other given Sunday and you look around, this place is only 20% filled. If that, I've seen much less than 20% of seats taken. And it's a sea of gray and white hair. There's not a child to be seen. So my point here, why am I talking about the Catholic Church when we're talking about the military? What the heck? All right, here's what I'm trying to say. You make something more valuable and more desirable by increasing the standard. It has to be earned. There's that exclusivity that you say, look, come one, come all. Right? We have equality of opportunity here. Come one, come all. But here's our standard. Here's the standard you have to meet. And people flock to it. We can look at this time and time again. We can look at this in sports. We can look at this in the corporate world. We can look at this in religious faiths. And certainly we can look at that through the military experience as well. You have to elevate the standard. And we've had 7 straight years of lowering the standard. Yeah. I think that, like, we're all saying the same thing. Chad, I'm agreeing with you. We want killers. We want predators. And I don't mean sexual predators. I mean, we want battlefield hardened warriors. That's who we want to build our recruits into. And they want to come. They really do.
It's like if we raise the standards or maintain the ones we had. Weird.
Yeah, I know. Right?
Concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's to go back to your thing about NATO retention, Doc. I think one of the difference there that skews that number is in a European country, once you've become career military, it's probably too strong a word to use, but you're kind of ostracized.
Yep.
Or pigeonholed. You're not going to go anywhere else. The Brits take it as far as once you're in the regiment, you're in the regiment. And if you go to Afghanistan, for example, and you suffer the worst fate, in the American military, your spouse is going to be told, sorry about your bad luck. Here's your folded flag. Now clear out the house. We need it for somebody else. In a British regiment, if the wife decides to stay in the regiment, she stays in the regiment. The regiment takes the responsibility there. If you serve a full career in your regiment, part of your retirement will just be you'll go to the pensioner home and you're still on the payroll to a certain extent. You're not required to go out in society and do anything. So the Europeans look at what their people in the military are supposed to do very differently than what we do here. And if you're career military, you're not ever expected to do anything else in that society.
Yeah, that's worked for them and against them, but you're right, it's different. And maybe it's not fair to say apples to apples comparison. I agree with that. A lot of Europe still has caste, leftovers from caste society. And so when you join the military, you're right. There is an effort to retain you. But I'll also say that part of it is, and this is, I'm really picking on Germany here, but it could be true across almost all European countries, is that they have very tiny militaries, and the reason is they disparage their military. Chances are, if you're dealing with a European soldier, you've got a guy that came there to be, hardcore, because God knows the Germans hate him. I mean, they do. They call him, they're up till just the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. Germany has a 30-year tradition of saying anybody who joins the military, and particularly those who go into the army and combat arms, are mentally deranged. They're morally corrupt. Of course, exactly the opposite is true. But you know what I'm saying? So I'm agreeing with you, Les. Like, once you've been artillery, armor, infantry, and you are in Germany, I mean, the only way you're going to get a job is to hide that. You're just going to have to hide
your business, basically.
Right. You right. I mean, it's a shame to be a veteran.
Now, to that thing, though, on the other side of that is those governments tend to take care of those people on a level far above us. There is no, like in the American system here, you do your 20 or 30 in the service, and then you go out, and there's probably a 50% chance you go get another government job. 20 years later, you're double dipping. There's no double dipping in Europe. They don't even understand the concept,
Right.
because, go ahead, Brent.
Well, I was just going to say, Doc's conversation just now has reminded me of a point. And this is something I've kind of noticed recently, because we hit the 20-year anniversary of the 2003 Iraq invasion. And two things. I did a live stream with several of my guys that I went downrange with. And then I also posted a picture of me, during the invasion, saying, hey, it's 20-year anniversary. And many comments were very anti-U.S. military involvement there, A, and B, anti-U.S. military. And it was very reminiscent, from what I was reading, very reminiscent of what we experienced during Vietnam. People targeting military personnel for the decisions made by politicians, right? And this was very prevalent in not just my posts, but in the live stream and many other 2003 Iraq OIF-1 starting videos that I went to. I mean, it was just inundated on these web pages. Now, to be fair, I can see what like the likes to dislike ratio is, and the dislike was still very minuscule compared to likes. However, there is a larger vocal crowd that is, very disparaging to U.S. military personnel for the actions and, and decisions of those in power at the time, right? I didn't make the decision to invade Iraq. I was a United States Marine before 2003. However, when the balloon goes up, I'm going. So, if you're going to be the person that's going to follow these hippies of the 60s that spit on U.S. servicemen coming back from Vietnam who did their duty, who served their country, well, go fuck yourself, dude. And I see this developing as time goes on, right? If you look at these comments, there ain't a single comment about how bad Saddam was, right? How many fucking people he murdered and killed and gassed and neighbors he invaded. It's like that never even existed. All I read is Saddam had no weapons of mass destruction. Okay, he didn't. Well, guess who didn't really deny that he had weapons of mass destruction? Saddam. He didn't quite let UN inspectors in and see all his shit, right? How many fucking years of trouble did UN inspectors go through inspecting their stuff? Okay, so guess what? You can't look back 20 years ago and the decisions made then and blame the troops that went in and executed their orders. All right. So I say this to say this. I see the attitudes of the 1960s towards U.S. servicemen resurfacing. Okay. Because what happened is after Vietnam, I think there was a large pushback against that type of behavior. And now look what we have. We went through a phase of during the GWAT, gratitude for U.S. servicemen. Hey, thank you for your service. It was almost nonstop and showing videos of U.S. servicemen coming back from overseas and, seeing their kids and loved ones and stuff. It was like an overcorrection to make up for all the bullshit that happened during Vietnam. Right. And I see a resurfacing of that type of behavior towards U.S. servicemen that serve in the military. And I can't help but say that I think that also plays a role in the recruitment. It's absolutely
Oh yeah, it has to. If you look in, I think it was 1974 when the U.S. military went fully volunteer, and there were no more draftees being drafted. There were still some in the service. I think it was that year's defense budget that literally a quarter of the defense budget was for pay, just because they had to ramp up the pay to get it up there to be competitive with the civilian world. And then you look at the 1970s whole modernization cycle essentially missed, dealing with those issues. And we're seeing those conditions start to form again. Military pay is on the raise, which is good, but it's becoming an increasing part. Like there's definitely a modernization cycle being missed here, for sure, mainly because the all new programs that are supposed to be awesome and wonderful turned out to suck and not work. So we have to keep using the old shit, but it's still a missed cycle. And people are probably looking at the military as a whole going, gee, that's the bomber my grandfather flew in. Gee, that's the Amtrak my dad used in Desert Storm. Oh, gee, look at this thing that's, older than my dad. And that's probably having an effect too.
Yeah, well, okay, so there are exceptions to this rule, but you go back to, I remember I was surprised when I learned this. You go back to the end of World War I, right? And the troops came back, and there was big parades. Yay, everybody's home, and we have victory parades and everything else. But of course, the Allies tanked. Woodrow Wilson, and I'm no fan, but he was saying, "Look, treat the enemy. They're no longer the enemy. They're the vanquished, but we need to treat them with respect and dignity and all this other stuff." And none of the European allies would listen to him. And so, of course, we set the conditions in the wake of World War I for World War II. But here's what was happening back at home. And Stephen Ambrose, the historian who, of course, wrote Band of Brothers and all of this stuff, he noted that, as well as other historians have noted, that in the wake of World War I, after the parades were done, the veterans were seen as suckers that were gassed. I mean, they were victorious, and they're like, yeah, no, you guys got so used and abused by your own, corporatism, your own government, and everything else. And there was real question by 1939 whether Americans would even enlist in the military. At some point, you can't blame those when you pulled the trigger. I was just following. It's not a viable excuse. I wasn't just following orders.
Just validated my comments.
Yeah, right. And so my point is that this isn't new, Brent, is that if you go back and look at the attitudes towards the military in the wake of World War I, they're pretty disparaging. And that was a victory, so-called victory, right? And it's because the war happened, the war to end all wars, and it was pretty clear immediately, we were lied to. So all the veterans became suckers and became stupid. And of course, they were suffering through all sorts of ailments and mental and emotional and physical. And so, there was a real question whether or not American young men would rise to the occasion for World War II. Of course they did, and we now refer to them as the greatest generation. But the propaganda machine did not end with the end of World War II. Because of the Cold War, the propaganda machine continued, and so we continued to call them wonderful names, and they became the greatest generation. And in many ways they were. I don't mean to take away from that, but I'll say this, that after every war, there is this natural kind of implosion. You hear this, who's the Roman that said, everyone loves the military when the enemy's at your gate, right?
I think that was Vegetius, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And so everybody loves the military while the enemy's at your gate, but after the parades are done and victory's been had or defeat, we forget those veterans. They become homeless, sleeping on the street, right? So this isn't new. And particularly given the ugliness of the end of Afghanistan and, frankly, the ugliness of the end of Iraq, which may yet wind up being a success. But given that ugliness, oh, yeah, all the naysayers, all the soy boys, all the, spineless cowards, they're going to come out and take their shot.
I think the same can be said for the military service industry and the public service, public safety industry. You know, everybody loves a cop when somebody's trying to bust in your door at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
You know, and all the other times they hate on cops.
Yeah.
You know, and not everybody, but you know what I mean.
Mhm.
You know, so it's whatever somebody's need is at the time, their immediate need.
Right. Right. I don't put too much weight into what cowards say. I just don't care.
No.
Well,
And
and
that's part of it.
I just want to say, you know, he said I'm the one who pulled trigger. Hell yeah, and I do it all over again. And guess what?
Absolutely.
I went down range to fight jihadis, and guess what? They flooded to Iraq, both during the invasion and after the fact. And yeah, I had a blast. Literally.
Literally.
I mean, there's honorable. I gotta be honest. You know, I was Cold War, and while I was training to kill Russians and to kill Chinese, I was trained to kill communists, right? And here's the interesting thing: is that I never felt any angst towards the Russian people, the communist people. In fact, even the North Koreans, doing combat operations against them, I actually had a pretty damn healthy respect for those men and those warriors. I felt more kinship with them than I did with many of my national leaders, right? And certainly the communist soy boy cowards that I went to school with. And so I didn't feel anything bad about them. Terrorists? Are you kidding me? No. I don't identify with terrorists. Terrorists target civilians. They target women and children. And I'll tell you what, in Afghanistan and Iraq, there are more women and children being killed than anybody else, and it was a terrorist killing them. So, you know, do I feel bad about killing terrorists or that terrorists were killed? No, I'm dismayed we ever took them prisoner. You know, why was Guantanamo even in existence? It should have never happened because we never should have taken them prisoner. There's no, all terrorists need a good killing.
Give no quarter.
Yeah, no quarter. No quarter is still a viable martial concept. And so, no, non-state actors and particularly terrorists, nah. No loss for humanity there. No loss. That's a completely acceptable. I won't dance on anyone's grave. I won't cheer for death, but the loss of terrorists are completely acceptable outcomes to me. And I think you're right, Brent. I think the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan pulled in terrorists from around the world and exhausted them at incredible rates. It was fantastic.
Well,
They were just evil, vile, disgusting fuckers.
Yeah.
Let's. I'm just using this as an example. No way am I making a 1-for-1 comparison here. But let's look at the conflict in Ukraine. Right, you got all these people from Western nations flooding into Ukraine to fight on the behalf of the Ukrainians against the Russians. Right, for a cause that they believe is noble.
Yeah.
Well, flip that script. Different set of circumstances, different sides. You had a flood of all these jihadis from all over the world, Arab nations, and probably even Africa too, flooding and down there in I had a brain fart. What's the Russian country?
Chechnya.
Oh my God, a bunch of Chechens came down to Iraq to fight against us.
Yep.
All these jihadis came down there to fight us there. And hey, it was a global war on terrorism.
That's where the Americans were, and that's what they wanted to kill.
Yeah. Yeah. Strategically made sense to go in Iraq. Do I see it as a tragedy? Of course I do. War is a tragedy. And I want Iraq and Afghanistan to be success. You know, I put in blood, sweat, and tears. I want them to be a success to this very day. But yeah, but I don't have any regrets about going or trying. I only have regrets that American politicians are cowards and unworthy of the seat they hold.
Yep.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, are we reaching culmination or we got more saved rounds?
Well, I'll go on one that goes back to recruiting. And part of it is on the benefits track, but what's your advantage today to join the military? You know, one of the things that from the previous generations, my dad was one of these guys, for sure, told the story 1,000 times, how joining the military improved his lot in life with you get to sleep longer, you got more food, it was good food, plenty of it. Joining the military was a massive improvement in his life over what he grew up in. And I've heard that stories by a lot of people of his generation. Now in America, even if you're on the lower end of the social economic strata, are you really improving your life that much? And if you're in that area, let's say the inner city, that would desperately gain the most from the military, you probably have something in your short record you've already accumulated that's going to disqualify you from the military. So of that pool that's available, that meets the needs, that doesn't need a waiver to get in, how does it improve what you got? How does it make your situation in life better?
My father was the same thing as yours, Les. He literally improved his social economic status by joining the military and did a 20-year career. I joined, but my dad had already, look, the military was a step down for me. Okay. My mother came from a well-to-do, well-heeled family. Let's just say that. It was incredibly well-connected, journalism, soldiers, Green Berets, you name it. And of course, I'm not exaggerating a shred to say that I would go to my grandparents' summer party in their backyard and see multiple senators. Okay, so we were well-heeled. For me to go into the United States Army Infantry was definitely a step down in lifestyle. But it was a step up in honor.
Oh, sure. I'm not impinging the honor of serving, the cook at an Air Force DFAC in Minot, North Dakota has honor for serving, not making anything there. But what I'm saying is your social economic thing, before you go, you join the military, you probably come out with a good career, or at least come out with a skill. You're putting yourself ahead and getting your lot in life. Give the Navy credit. You go on a ship and do any task you're assigned for 12 hours a day, every goddamn day. That ship comes off that deployment, you will be good at it.
Yep.
But there's a lot of people now that doesn't really improve their lot in life.
Well, it can. First off, we've talked about how very few of our warriors take advantage of their GI Bill, and more of them need to do that. And, Jared said, yeah, man, so I went to a trade school. Fantastic. The university is full of, DEI wokeism. Don't go. I mean, unless you're going into a STEM field, just don't go. I mean, but if you go into HVAC or plumbing or welding or, farming, whatever it is, wherever you want to go, I'd say, computer programming, my God, you don't need a degree. Go to a trade school, right? All right. So definitely take advantage of that. But beyond that, Les, I think you just hit the nail on the head. For us infantry types, we learned leadership. And we learned that probably better than anybody else in the military. Okay. And when you step in, but the military learns leadership. I mean, they really invest in their leaders, regardless of what MOS you are. But when I came outside of the military, immediately saw, oh my God, the civilian world lacks this just horrifically. It's like this cancer that they don't have. So I would say even going in the infantry or combat arms or something like this, you are going to come out an experienced, well-groomed leader after just 4 years. But everybody else, I can give you story after story after story. My kid brother came out and he was one of those few that didn't go combat arms. He went into the medical corps, right? He comes out after 6 years of service. He's all of, 24? He jumps into a job in the civilian world at a hospital. And the woman that he replaced as supervisor, I think she was about 10 years older than him, had a bachelor's degree. Andrew did not. And he just came in and they said, yeah, you're the new supervisor. You got seniority. And she was furious. And she said, why? And they looked at her and said, because he's been to the best schools in San Antonio. What are you talking about? He's been to the best tech schools in the world, far better than your degree. And he's got 6 years of doing it in leadership positions. What do you mean, why? He's a veteran doing this.
And there's your problem, Doc. you know, in our generation, when we left active duty and we went to our first boss, probably had served as a veteran sometime in the 50s, 60s, or 70s.
Yep.
You're not going to find that person anymore. So when you walk in with that skill, the person you're interviewing with doesn't know what it means. I've never, in all my experience and out here in the civilian world, that been with a company big enough to have an HR department, I've never met anybody in those HR departments that served in the military. And say
Or you
want.
get an HR supervisor that makes comments like that super chat that just came through a few minutes ago.
Yeah. And, you know, they don't understand it, and nobody gets hired without HR saying so. So I, you know, I don't have an HR department at my company, one, for just that reason. But two, in a major corporation, doesn't matter if the person in charge of that department found the perfect guy, and he can make all the justifications in the world why that guy's perfect. If HR says no, that person will not be hired.
I got a actual example, real world example, and I'll explain how I know this was the case. So when I left active duty, I was a sergeant, combat veteran, 2 combat tours in Iraq at this point. I wanted to get into armed security while I went to school and used my GI Bill. And I went and interviewed for a company. I'm not going to name the company. You know, the interview I thought went fantastic. And they were like, hey, we're going to give you a call in the next day or two to get you back in here for, you know, follow-up and everything else. And, you know, a day or two came and went and no phone call. And I was like, I wonder what's going on. And I kept calling the recruiter at this particular company. I was like, hey, any updates? He's like, oh, no, nothing yet. You know, stay tuned. And then, you know, 2 days turned to a week, still nothing. So when I called the recruiter the following week, he's like, hey, man, if I were you, I would start, you know, looking at other options. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, it's armed security. I'm a fucking sergeant of Marines with combat experience. Like, I can't do an armed security job at this company. You kidding me? So anyways, it was bullshit, right? But hey, it is what it is. I didn't get the job. So I literally went and interviewed at Costco to push freaking shopping carts as a fucking combat veteran sergeant, right? And I'm in that interview process. You know, just because I needed a job, I'm in that interview process, and the manager's like, dude, he's like, you are so overqualified for this. But he's like, I will absolutely give you this job because, you know, I know you need a job. And he's like, I'll absolutely hire you. And like, he walked out to go get the paperwork. And in the process of him doing that, I got a phone call from the company, right? And they're like, hey, you know, we had a candidate back out that we were going to hire. You know, are you still interested? And I was like, yeah, this is the one that turned me down. So I went back in there. I get hired. Well, I start working at that company, and I start getting chummy with all the, you know, the people that are in the manager positions there and stuff. And and by the way, they were all freaking Marines, former Marines. So this is more proof, right? And I said, hey, what happened with, you know, why wasn't I hired right away? Why was I, you know, passed over by another guy? What happened? What went wrong? They told me that they got a call from HR, and HR told them that the department was too white and too male. And therefore, they hired a very short Hispanic female over me for that position. Well, guess what? When she started and she went to her initial training, she couldn't qualify with the shotgun. She couldn't handle it. So once she failed the qualification, they called me back to do that job. And I ended up working at that position for like 6 years while I went to school before I moved on to another job. So 100% how that is not racist and sexist is beyond me. A combat veteran was passed over because I was the wrong race and I was the wrong sex. 100% happened. Tell me how that's a freaking fair and just society right there.
No, now you're getting to the point of the failures of DEI. Look, DEI has been known. I first heard Jordan Peterson say this probably 2 years ago or something like this. And he said, well, DEI is, you know, is known to have failed, or it doesn't work, or something to this and while I normally, I don't always agree with them, but I normally agree with them. I remember thinking, dude, you can't just leave that. You can't just say that and leave that hanging, back it up. Well, okay. So the education of me this past week or so has been, oh my God, DEI has at least a 10 to 12 year history of known failures. And I mean, on the grandiose scale, we're not talking like anecdotes here and there or some small company. Hold on. The Daily Signal, March this year, Representative Jim Banks of Republican in Indiana, chairman of the Armed Service Subcommittee, said that meritocracy nature of the military, which allows people of diverse backgrounds to succeed. Quote, in a review of 418 prejudice reduction experiments conducted by Princeton psychology professor Elizabeth Levy Pollack and co-authors, concluded that much of the anti-bias training is misguided. Wait, I'm not done. BBC, research of 800 American firms over 3 decades, this is from the BBC, revealed that 5 years after diversity training became required for managers, companies saw no increase in the proportion of minority groups in management. In fact, the proportion of Black women and Asian Americans actually dropped from middle and senior management levels. DEI is known to be divisive. It separates people. You can sit there and find DEI professors, DEI corporate leaders that have now turned on it and said, look, this was a huge, huge mistake. When you sit there and say, you're different, you're different, you're different, you're separating people. Like the people who really want to reach across the aisle and talk to people. I've never been around whatever, Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, gays, whatever it is. I want to reach across that aisle and work with these people and say, hey, man, we have common stuff, common threads. We have common ground. Let's do great things together. DEI is actually shown, like research, just again, 10,000, 30,000 people in this 5-year study. That's 800 firms in a 30-year study. Come on, guys. What are they saying? They're like, no, I won't reach out and mentor women. No, I won't reach across. Anything I say, no matter how well intended, how much I want to do this, I've got to walk on eggshells. I cannot do it. I don't have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in this. I don't have 6 years to give to do that. Easiest thing is I'm not going to work with them. I'm not going to talk to them. And when given the choice to hire, I won't hire them. And that's from the well-meaning people. DEI has failed, and it is failing the military.
Just like when I first got out of the military, affirmative action was still a big thing. Same thing, pretty much. I tested with the Pennsylvania State Police 3 or 4 times. I think it was once every 6 months. And because of affirmative action and all this other stuff, I was too white and I was the wrong sex. And this is 2000, 2001. Finally, I just got to the point where I just gave up on it.
Harvard Business Review, quote, we found very little evidence that diversity training affected the behavior of men or white employees. Overall, the 2 groups who typically hold the most power in organizations and are often the primary targets of these interventions, end quote. So they were saying, like, look, it's just failed. It's absolutely failed. Here's one from The Atlantic, which I think is super cool because the person I'm quoting was identified in this article as being very liberal, like extremely liberal. She is a feminist, and she says, quote, DEI training exists to make the executive teams of corporations and boards look good, end quote. Liberals hate it too. DEI has failed everyone, every single one. In fact, of all the studies done, the only quote I could find, was that when people were talking about, well, it hasn't done well, and they're trying to defend it, and then they have to admit its failures. The only outcome that I found was that Caucasian women, white women, young, Caucasian, unmarried white women, DEI training was shown that they will speak up. They will ask about benefits. They'll ask for, hey, can I get a mentor? This was the one thing that it did benefit was young white females. And that's the person it was targeting. I mean, but it was benefiting them because they were saying, oh, well, then I will ask for help. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that was the only demographic over all of these studies, exhaustively. North America, Europe, Australia. I think, I don't want to quote that. I thought one came from East Asia. I want to say like Japan. But anyway, whatever it is, they're just colossal failures, but they fail both ends of the spectrum.
All right, guys, we are 10 mics to 2-hour mark. So I think this is a good time to wrap it up. So again, just going to go around the horn. So if you got something coming down the pipe in your YouTube channel, don't forget to address that, as well as your final thoughts on the discussions tonight. So kicking it over to Pegasus Test. You got the con.
All right, as tradition dictates. Well, recruiting and retention are a problem in the U.S. military. The numbers are moving the wrong way. We've discussed a lot of the reasons here tonight, and I'm going to say, in my point of view, whatever the reason is, it's not going to get better anytime soon. Got some good gear reviews coming up on my channel. Also encourage everybody to go check out InRange TV and Forgotten Weapons, where they've got coverage of our recent night vision match, Midnight Brutality. It was pretty awesome, and there hasn't been a match quite like it. And if anybody didn't make it, you're going to feel bad about it.
So recruiting in the past, I think, was easier, especially in and just after the 1980s. Think about it. Kids had cartoons like G.I. Joe, and you had the 80s action flick that gave older kids motivation to speak to a recruiter. Yeah, they were probably propaganda, but so fucking what? It worked. Let's bring that shit back. On a short and sweeter note, I'm glad to see that the military has, at least for now, dropped the woke commercials. Let's hope they take it where it needs to go in the future. And that's it.
Yeah, so I'll reiterate, we are, One Shepherd is definitely getting some love from the brutality matches, specifically from InRange and Forgotten Weapons. It was just a fantastic event. I've heard nothing but just great reviews for the Midnight Brutality that happened just, a week or two ago, that One Shepherd supported. So that is just, in general, hey, that's a great kudos to us. My channel has a mechanized infantry tactics video coming out this week. So look for that. I know it's been a while since I've released anything, but this is a big one that was requested by several different sources. And I said, okay, I'm going to try and tackle this. It's a big topic. But of course, there's not enough said about mechanized warfare. We all tend to talk about, light fighters and dismounted. So there's that. My final thoughts tonight are, summation is this. DEI wokeism is the end of meritocracy, right? It's not about, equality and opportunities. It's not. It's about destroying meritocracy, saying just because you're the best, just because you're the smartest, most capable, brightest, doesn't mean that you should be promoted or be recognized. We should promote and recognize people who are far inferior in performance and capability. And so that's not, that's an antithesis to the military culture and to military traditions, and frankly, to warfighting readiness. And so for our brass, the senior level of the militaries, all of the branches of the militaries who continue to insist wokeism and DEI is not impacting recruiting, I say that's categorically incorrect. Moreover, DEI itself is proven to be a divisive failure for a culture, and the military should at once drop this. But I do want to say this. When the data was, analyzed, it was very stark and very clear that the demographic that suffers from DEI training and wokeism is the very demographic that it hoped to raise up. That is, liberal, Marxist Democrats who they thought, well, we're going to help raise you up. And it was by teaching them, that demographic, to despise America exceptionalism. And well, the result is that they don't want to serve in the military. That demographic doesn't want to serve in the military. There has been an 80% reduction since 2015 of that demographic, an 80% reduction of their willingness to serve in the military. What it hasn't impacted is your conservative, Republican, Christian men and women that are, filled with patriotism and still want to serve. So here's what we do. First and foremost, stop disparaging the youth, because there's plenty who want to serve and they're very capable, and we need to get them into the military. Number two, encourage excellent young men and women to enlist or seek a commission in the military. Keep in mind that, again, DEI wokeness holds back Marxism, feminism, and anti-Americans. And let's go one farther. While I'm disparaging DEI wokeism, we need to consider, as veterans, whether we even want to intervene against DEI and wokeism, that teachings and those slogans, because frankly, it's only holding back the anti-Americans.
All right. So my channel, just yesterday, I filmed my first introduction video, just a little bit about myself and whatnot, and it turned out absolutely awful, even after I tried to edit it. So when I get back to Virginia this weekend, I will refilm it with a little bit better of a, I don't want to say a script, but a more of an outline to it. So hopefully by the end of the weekend, I'll have my first official introduction video to my 2 Alpha Solutions channel going up on my channel. Hopefully I'll have it up before the SEER challenge for next weekend. As far as recruitment and retention, I did my 4 years. Prior to, right after I got out of my C school and got my first permanent duty station, the maintenance unit I was attached to was pretty much a shit show. The leadership there was terrible. When I transferred over to my counter narcotics stuff that I did, the leadership there was outstanding. There was a huge, drastic contrast between the two. The chief petty officers on the maintenance side were just terrible leaders. I don't even know how else to put it. And luckily I didn't have to stay there very long. When I went over to the other side, TAD, the leadership there was good. It was very good. My only downfall was I didn't have the background that they did, so I couldn't get a lot of the schools that I needed or wanted to get to make myself better for that. I felt like I was kind of cannon fodder on that end to some degree. I ended up getting hurt fast open out of a helo, hurt my back really bad, and after that I just got out. It was at that point where I decided I just need to get out and go a different route. So the retention on that end, because if I would have stayed in, I would have gone back probably to a maintenance unit, and I didn't want to do that. When I first joined the military, I wanted to go to the Marine Corps. That's what I wanted to do, and it was in 1995 when I joined the Navy. I tried to join the Marine Corps first. There was, I think, at that time, a 1.5 year waiting period to go, and I didn't want to wait a 1.5 years. Then I went over to the Navy. There was a little bit less of a wait. It was like 8 months or 9 months, I believe it was, until I can go to boot camp. And then, because this is right around when they were doing the big force reduction, Then I think in September, October, maybe it was even August of 95 is when they had the big government shutdown, and I was delayed again in leaving. So I didn't leave for boot camp until the day before Thanksgiving in 1995. So there was a whole big catastrophe there of just trying to get in. So anyway, I'll let you go back to that, and we'll turn it back over to you, Brent.
All right. So first and foremost, I want to thank everybody that came on tonight. Had some latecomers, and absolutely appreciate those guys coming in and contributing to this conversation. So first and foremost, what's coming down my channel, I've got a pack review, a Crossfire DG1 Spitfire pack. It's essentially like a day pack patrol. If you guys know Crossfire packs, they're designed for warfighters. So you can expect that video coming out sometime this week. Also want to highlight that Jared and I, Sear Challenge on the Grunt Proof channel, the last episode of the actual challenge itself, the 10th episode will be like an ending ceremony kind of deal. But the last episode is this upcoming week, Sunday. So be sure to tune into that. See how the Sear Challenge comes to culmination. So that's pretty much it for my channel. For this topic, it's a very interesting topic. I'm glad the my peers here helped wanting to revisit this, and I think it's turned out really well. I just want to recap some of the things I've said earlier, and just start off by not everybody can join the U.S. military. Or of the U.S. population, I think it's only like 23% is even eligible. Of the 17 through like 24-year-olds, only 23% is even eligible to join the U.S. military. All right. So less than a quarter of the U.S. population can even apply to become a U.S. service member. All right. And then of that quarter, you got to look at, are they mentally fit? Are they physically fit? So it just dwindles from there. So you're already starting off with a very low pool. And again, guys, I feel like we're just in a post-Vietnam situation here. I myself have served under 4 different U.S. presidents, 2 of which I enjoyed serving under, 2 of which I did not. All right, so I just feel like we're just, the nation. It's just a constant roller coaster of ups and downs. If I had to give advice to a young man, I'd say absolutely join. All right, if you don't like the current administration, well, guess what? It'll change. It will change. All right. And then, again, under the 4 presidents I served, 2 of them were Republican, 2 of them were Democrat. All right. So, I mean, it just is what it is. That's how the things go. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to throw out. I am concerned about, some of the stuff that's come out in the more recent years. Some call it wokeness. It's very concerning. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff that's come down the pipe. I absolutely do not agree with female integration in combat arms, but that's been going on for a long time now. Hill, Doc, you brought it up. What year did that get implemented?
2015.
2015. So 2015 is when that whole deal came into fruition, and here we are now. The U.S. military has not crumbled because of that. I still don't believe in that, but it's the law of the land. It's been going since 2015, and it's where we're at. Are we a lesser combat capable force than we were before that? Yeah, I'm sure we'll find out because war, unfortunately, is probably on the horizon. So that's all I got to say. Has anybody got any saved rounds?
Nope, it's been a good conversation tonight. I appreciate it.
Yeah, agreed. Oh, we do have a save round. Oh, not that one. Wrong one. Here we go. Boom. Going around the horn. Les.
Yes.
That is a legitimate answer. I'm going blonde. What you got?
Brunette. Definitely brunettes.
Yes.
All right. Good stuff.
My robots will be they'll have multiple like skins. You can like trade them off everything else. The robots will be both. You don't have to choose.
Oh,
It is
Is
fine.
it like an add-on, you know?
oh, this
It's
guy
not
says
great.
redhead. Trouble. Trouble. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in tonight. It's been fun. Have a good night.
All right.